Hey guys, and welcome back to the Matt to Million channel. Now, you often hear a lot of jargon around focusing on the process over outcome because that's how you can be the person that you need to be. But as time goes on, often you find people saying this just because that's what they've heard other people say without really truly believing in it or understanding why themselves. So today I'm going to be running through the science on this concept, why it's so important to your progression and longevity as a trader, and also why for the best parts your trading profits are never going to be enough relative to our good old friend, the human brain. And as a result of that, why we'll be much happier and successful by focusing on the process components rather than every single big outcome. And if you're new around here, I focus on all things personal finance and day trading. So if you are enjoying the content and would like to see more, make sure you tap that likes up button, subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure you got those alerts turned on so you don't miss when I post my next video. Cool, so with that being said, let's get cracking. Okay, so the focus and the roots of this video that I'd like to introduce you to are the hedonic treadmill and hedonic adaptation. Now, it's the premise that humans will return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite positive or negative events in our life. So what does that actually mean? Well, here are some of the pros and cons. So let's say, for example, you had a great day, week, month, year of profit, and you have this really euphoric, happy feeling that takes over you where you're super proud of yourself, everything's going well. The principle is the fact that even though all of that's happened, ultimately you will return back to the state of level of happiness that you were before all of that happened, hence the term hedonic adaptation. Equally, of course, it can work the other way around too. So if you have a particularly bad month, day, year, whatever, once you have that big swing of emotion of unhappiness, your emotional state within your mind will return relatively quickly back to the state of happiness that you usually were prior to that bad event happening. Now, the hedonic treadmill is the premise of this thing that we keep putting ourselves on, believing that every time we get on it, we're going to find a thing that's going to make us truly happy forever and a day. But in reality, it won't actually make us relatively more happy than we are today for a very long period at all. And of course, we're talking about general day-to-day happiness. We're not talking about when you reflect on everything and you think, oh, this has been good because of this and blah, blah, blah. We're talking about when you're just going through your day normally, how consistent and balanced your emotions are and your general level of happiness. So how does this relate to your trading and why should you be aware of it? Simply put, if you're always chasing that larger profit month, it's always going to be relative to what you have now. So whilst our state of happiness is swung from one side to another depending on profits or losses, ultimately it always comes back to a consistent state of equilibrium. And this happens pretty much irrespective of whatever situation you're in. Of course, extreme examples avoid here. So when we start considering the laws of relativity, you may be super happy earning a 10% month when you're used to averaging 4%. But then it doesn't take long for you to then set that 10% as the new benchmark, and everything you're doing is focused around trying to achieve or overachieve it, with your mind thinking that it's going to bring you this huge life-altering happiness, which of course it doesn't. I mean, sure, you get the rush of happiness, but then the novelty wears off, and usually this gets quicker each time. And from there, you're onto setting even loftier goals in the pursuit of actually feeling properly happy. The point is, your happiness is very rarely permanently lifted as a result of these things. And the problem then comes is when you're constantly thinking that you will reach happiness by doing more, you end up getting incredibly disappointed if you don't reach it, and therefore you can swing into more of a bad slant. And Darren Brown, for those of you who are interested in him or have seen him, sort of refers to this in his book about happiness. It's the principle that, let's say you have a reasonable house, for example. When you move on and you buy a much bigger house with more room and a larger garden, you get that initial novelty, that rush of happiness when you get it. But really, your natural base level of happiness reverts to what it was before you moved because you get used to and accustomed to these environments. But the difference is now that you've set this bar at the new house. So if you were to move and you were to find the same house that you're in now but somewhere else, you wouldn't feel the same amount of happiness and you'd be less inclined or more disappointed if you had to move sideways. And the biggest context that he puts on this is that ultimately a house is a house. Like if you're in a house and you enjoy being there, it doesn't really matter the size per se. And in short, this is what happens with trading profits. It's this premise of if I get to X, Y, and Z, then I will feel blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't really work like that. Because in reality, your benchmark for normal will just change, and therefore the things that once brought you lots of happiness and joy will no longer. The happiness seeking ultimately links back to the dopamine rushes that you get from seeking more and more achievements. But it becomes harder and harder to achieve that same dopamine rush because the tasks that you're having to take on are so much larger relatively than what you started with. So how does this link to enjoying the process? Well, one considered way of combating hedonic adaptation is to distribute the gains. So in a real life example, let's just say you got an extra couple of £100 in your pay paycheck or dollars at the end of each month. And with that, you end up going out and eating out a lot more at fancy restaurants, or you did a lot more takeout, whatever it may be. Now, as you start to do it more regularly, the novelty will begin to wear off, and then that will become your latest benchmark, whereby you see this as normal life, and therefore your happiness will adjust to match that. Now, the idea of distributing your gains is essentially not using all of that money at once. It could be using it on loads of little things that can give you those little surges of happiness to make the money spread further. So it's not just giving you one thing that's going to bring you joy, it's giving you multiple. This way, it prolongs your heightened level of happiness for far longer than it would if you just focused on one, because it gives you more surges of extra dopamine on a more frequent and regular basis. This is the opposite of had you focused on that one thing, you get this huge peak of happiness, but then you get a huge trough of emotions after a big event or a big holiday or something along those lines. In the holiday example, we call this post-depression the holiday blues, right? But when you consider it, although you were potentially happier on holiday, by the time you come back, you go through the unhappiness state, but then when everything equals back out again, your level of happiness is broadly the same as what it was before you went away on holiday. And this, of course, can be identified on all sorts of scales. It may be that if you go to Spain once a year, you feel this, but if you went to Spain 4 times a year and that became the normal, you're still going to experience the same thing for all of the other times that you haven't been. Now, in trading, we always say enjoy the process. And that those who focus and enjoy the journey rather than focusing on the destination are far happier and more emotionally consistent. So in trading, when we say enjoy the process or focus on the journey rather than the destination, this is essentially us in trading distributing our gains. So instead of hunkering down for this one big outcome that we think is going to make us truly happy, we distribute this into small mini challenges and bursts that are met throughout the process. And this, in the majority of cases, will make people much happier and emotionally consistent. And with these smaller goals, the more that you're motivated by them, the happier you're going to be as you're achieving them. So therefore, you're as happy, if not more happy, due to more steps and dopamine rushes that you get along the way. So when compared to the one big target role, you're waiting all of that time, hating the process to get to this promised land that doesn't turn out to be a promised land. By breaking it down, you're getting all of the same sort of dopamine rushes by feeling successful doing what you need to do, but you actually do that as part of the process. So whether the outcome itself is achieved in that moment or not, you still had a good journey up to it. And this leads to much less of a pendulum swinging from one side to the other. This in turn naturally provides you more focus and enjoyment on the process itself. And then the big goals just look after themselves. But most importantly, this allows your emotions to swing back from a far less extreme. So you can emotionally reset from a big winning month very quickly, and also on the swing side, and almost more importantly, you can swing side from a bad month much quicker. And the rationale behind this is, of course, that because you enjoy the process, your main bulk of enjoyment comes from going through the journey. It isn't hinged on that one big outcome. So therefore, it's a lot easier to adjust from a big win or a big loss, because ultimately you're looking forward to going back to the process that you enjoy. So overall, this is why you should figure out your whys and start getting in love with the process. The more you enjoy it and embrace it, the quicker things are going to come naturally to you, the more emotionally consistent you're going to be, and ultimately you should just feel a lot happier in the process itself. So this video was just to shed some light on why this piece of advice is what it is and how our minds can benefit from it. Did you enjoy this video? I mean, what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments section below. And if you have enjoyed this video, or if you haven't, just tap that likes up button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure you've got your alerts turned on so you don't miss when I post my next video. If you're more about the daily updates and wanted to see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis from a charting perspective, from general advice, then head across to my Instagram @Matt2Million. But if I don't speak to you before, have a cracking week. I'll catch you on the next video. Take it easy.